notification somewhere. Did you say on here?
Yeah.
Well, it certainly changed. I can't. Oh yes, yes, it is. It's got it now. Yeah, see that now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting, and we are rejoined by a very special guest. Dare I say, he is a very good comrade of mine. It is the former MP for Derby North, now part of a small but growing new brand of UK leftist journalism and host of the Festival of Resistance. It is Chris Williamson. Chris, thank you for coming back on 1+1.
Yeah, nice to be back, Youri.
Oh, it's very nice to have you back as well. And I was just saying off camera that I really like your program. It's your guests are fantastic. And of course the topics, whether it's Israel and Palestine, where does the left even go from here? Is the Labour Party even worth still trying to make into a left project, or where do we go from here? Should we try other avenues? These are all very important topics, which are now more important than ever, especially with I think a lot of people feeling very demoralized, right?
Oh, there's no doubt about that, and a lot of people have left the Labour Party now. I'd be interested to see the latest statistics in terms of membership numbers, bearing in mind that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was the biggest in Western Europe. And I've heard various rumours about the numbers which have left, which vary from 30,000 to 300,000, but the party still hasn't published the statistics. But it's undoubted, I think, that many people are disillusioned. Many have certainly left. Some are sticking in there for a little bit longer, seeing what happens with the National Executive Committee elections. Others are saying they're going to try and stick it out for the long term, with a view to try to, reshape the party to wrest control away. I think that's a forlorn proposition. I think that's going to be impossible. I don't think there'll be much scope either to influence the National Executive Committee elections, because the rules have recently been forced through by the new leader, Keir Starmer. And so I think our best bet is to, work on extra parliamentary activities with a view to potentially developing a new electoral vehicle to put people up for election in 2024. But in the meantime, there are many things that we can and should be doing, I think, in local communities to try and resist the impact of Boris Johnson's Tory government, which is going to be pretty devastating. But of course, the sad thing is that under Keir Starmer, there won't be a great deal of difference whether to be a Labour government led by Keir Starmer, because he's very much bought into the kind of neoliberal agenda in that sense. So that's why I think if you look at the media in Britain, you'll see that Keir Starmer is being given a very easy ride. And I think what the establishment view Keir Starmer as someone who was a safe pair of hands, a bit like they viewed Tony Blair. And you might start to find some of the mainstream newspapers, which are owned, as we know, by tax-exiled billionaires, getting behind Keir Starmer, because a Labour government led by him wouldn't unduly disturb the status quo, and that would be quite nice. Thank you very much for the the elites who have benefited so much from this economic system that has held sway for at least 4 decades.
And actually, before I get into the questions, one last, another question I wanted to ask about the Festival of Resistance, your new YouTube show, which I really do recommend people subscribe to. And if they're on Facebook, of course, they can always check it. They can always check out the show on Facebook. And is one of the reasons why why you wanted to get into journalism and interview fellow comrades who were slandered, tarred and feathered with the fake anti-Semitism crisis. Because you want to reach out to them and really have a public conversation. Where does the left go from here? But also, you can never have too many UK left media outlets, since there are so few UK left media outlets.
Yes, no, absolutely.
and was that one of the reasons why, even though you do have the Canary, even though you do have the World Socialist website, even though you do have Morning Star, Red Pepper, and some of the popular programs on RT, like George Galloway's mother of all talk shows, but that there still is it still is too small.
Yes,
an actual left-leaning outlets that that you thought to yourself, why not get into it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we felt was it was important to utilize the internet to try and put our message out there, as it were. As you say, there are far too few platforms that actually give an alternative perspective, and particularly in view of the fact that we weren't able to formally launch the resistance movement, which we were planning to do last month at a festival of resistance, which was going to be over a weekend. And we got some fantastic speakers lined up for that. The idea being to have not just a great conference, but to hopefully inspire people to go back to their local areas and get involved in activities on the ground. And so, yes, there are these other platforms, and they are really useful, and get the opportunity sometimes to speak on them, as do others. And it's important, I think, that we support them. But we just felt that it was useful to have our own medium to put our messages out there and to kind of communicate with our supporters and members to keep people in the loop in terms of what we were doing, and to talk about some of the issues which often don't get any airing at all in the mainstream. I mean, this week, for example, we'll be talking about the Bank of England's decision to seize the Venezuelan gold, 31 tons of it. I mean, this is something that I've been involved in campaigning against for over 18 months now. And in fact, someone sent me a video of a speech I made outside the Bank of England when this first all kicked off, as I say, about 18 months ago. And yet here we are. Still, the gold has not been returned. I mean, the Bank of England, they're behaving like sort of highway robbers, really. And the Venezuelan government has gone to the High Court, and the High Court ruled against the Venezuelan government. So obviously they've got to take it to the next step. But this is just outrageous, and I just think that many people will not be familiar with the story. And so we try and pick on issues which perhaps are not getting much of an airing to try and give that alternative perspective.
And second to last question on that before we get into the real nitty gritty then is now Novara Media was it was basically the British answer to what the Young Turks network was in the U.S., a very popular YouTube. The World Socialist website would probably describe them as pseudo left, but okay, they are center left of a Bernie Sanders persuasion. But that being said, very one of the most watched programs on YouTube, and Novara Media. Many people felt that they were kind of like, well, at least I felt that they were sort of like a UK answer to TYT. But then I noticed that they started to jump the shark. They started to jump the shark on the whole Brexit issue, which, okay, if you are an EU left reformist, I understand that completely, and I have a lot of sympathy for that for that position. And in fact, in many ways, EU left reformists have been sort of vindicated on what Brexit is going to implicate for the British people, since it is sadly under the Johnson administration, not under a Jeremy Corbyn or anyone of the left. But I didn't like how they how they became so much of a Remain fundamentalist outlet, and then of course, even more shameful than that was them jumping the shark on a lot of foreign policy issues, and of course, they also jumped the shark on the whole fake anti-Semitism crisis. I think they threw you under the bus. Ash Sakar actually slandered Jackie Walker as an anti-Semite, and my friends, Media Lens, the very well-known independent British media critic organization run by David Edwards and David Cromwell. In one of their media alerts, they actually show that Ash Sakar was cheering on Julian Assange's arrest. And I think that's all. And do you think all that being said, that's why a new show such as Festivals of Resistance is needed now more than ever?
Well, I absolutely think so. Yeah, I mean, look, Novara Media do still cover some really important and useful topics, but I think they've perhaps tried to become a little bit too mainstream, in my opinion. And I was very saddened and disappointed with the way in which they dealt with the whole anti-Semitism crisis and the way in which they threw me under the bus. I knew them all, and I'd shared platforms with them and considered them to be friends, actually. And so I was very, disappointed and not to say a little hurt by the way in which they treated me and indeed many others. And that really, frankly, has led us to the situation that we are in today. It's people like those in Novara Media who joined in the witch hunt, who essentially acted like useful idiots, really, for the opponents of the Corbyn project, the kind of modest socialist programme that Jeremy was spearheading. And that gave it more legs. Of course, Jeremy didn't help himself by not actually challenging the attacks. I mean, essentially, he was seeking to appease the unappeasable, as it were. And appeasement has never been a good strategy in history. If you look back through the decades and the centuries, appeasement has always failed, as far as I can tell. And I was urging Jeremy to stand up for his own reputation, to stand up for the Labour Party's reputation, to stand up for grassroots members. And I know from personal experience, having been a member of the Labour Party for 44 years at that point, that the Labour Party had been the backbone of the anti-racist movement. I'd been an active member, for example, of the Anti-Nazi League. But even before that, people involved in the Labour Party and the wider Labour movement stood shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community against the Oswald Mosley fascists in the 1930s. And there was a famous so-called Battle of Cable Street, where Mosley's fascists were seeking to march through the Jewish quarter in London, and basically the Labour movement and the Jewish community and the Irish community, they stood shoulder to shoulder and basically said that they shall not pass, and they did not pass, as it were. So to see then the Labour Party being demonised in the way in which we were was, I just think, totally wrong and a complete kind of corruption and perversion of history in reality. And to see people, like myself and Jackie Walker and many others who are long-standing anti-racist activists, some of whom were themselves Jewish, like Jackie Walker, being accused of anti-Semitism, it was truly shocking and appalling. And as I say, I think Jeremy, if Jeremy had stood up to it, then we would have been in a better and stronger position. And I think had Jeremy done so, the likes of Novara Media would have been less likely then, I think, to have joined in the feeding frenzy. He's going to say about Jackie Walker. You just sorry.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say it's just so tragic, and Jeremy Corbyn just had such terrible advisors, which we won't talk about because I talked about that with you last time you were on the show. Talked about it with Chris Marsden of the Socialist Equality Party, and he went even more harsh on Jeremy Corbyn. It was very hard to disagree, to disagree with him on a lot of what he said. I felt he was a bit too harsh on your position of still, encouraging people to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, even though he said, why, even though he, to paraphrase what he was saying, why, still support a party that just, threw you under the bus. And but knowing you, I know why you did that. I know why you still were encouraging people to support, Jeremy Corbyn at the last general election, which is another topic for another day. But that being said, it was just so tragic that that Jeremy Corbyn, who has spent his entire life being a Bennite, I guess, a Bennite type of labor, that he was to Gandhian or even more harsher language you used in the Peaser. And Jackie said to me that when I asked her if she don't she feel betrayed by Jeremy, Diane Abbott, and the leadership, And Jackie, funny enough, I think she faulted Corbyn's being too Gandhian. That was just in his nature, just to be too Gandhian. He was just too Gandhian for his own good. Kind of like what you once said to me, that sometimes Corbyn's greatest strengths are also his greatest weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah.
But the person who she said that she would that she would never forgive for this whole debacle was John McDonnell. Do you share that view?
Well, it's not just John. I mean, look, I've got the greatest of respect for John, and John has, offered and delivered a lot really for the movement over the years. But John lost his way, I think, as did the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. And I felt, and indeed said at meetings of the Socialist Campaign Group, that we needed to stand up to the smears. We needed to defend the Labour Party's reputation. We needed to push for these democratic reforms collectively. And they were just unwilling, I think. I think there was a fear factor going on. People were worried that if they spoke out on, particularly on the anti-Semitism crisis, that they themselves would then get tarnished with that anti-Semitic brush, as it were, and could end up, being suspended, maybe even expelled. And for that reason, I think it sort of chilled their willingness to show solidarity. And I just felt, frankly, as a socialist, you have to show solidarity when it's difficult, not just when it's easy. So it's not just really John. I mean, John clearly is a key figure, but the entire left contingent in the Parliamentary Labour Party let down the movement, in my opinion. They failed the movement by not actually defending robustly enough the positions that we were taking up, and not actually challenging at all this false narrative that was being put out there. And it seemed that particularly the people in Jeremy's office, who were functionaries, staffers, their default position was that whenever there was a complaint, was to retreat, was to apologise, was to give ground. And I think that was a huge error, because these people are not interested in apologies. The people that were attacking Jeremy, myself, and the kind of whole socialist agenda, they wanted to destroy it. And every apology, every concession was seen as weakness. And I did say this. I said this to the campaign group. I said it to Jeremy personally, that, this will not work. And all you're doing is feeding the beast and making it stronger. It'll keep coming back for more until such time as they.
Oh, it also, to me, it still is mind baffling that Al Jazeera, which I have my problems with Al Jazeera, but that's another topic for another day, because of their coverage of Syria and other issues, but that's a topic for another day. But Al Jazeera, very well-known and very revered international news outlet, which many left-leaning people watch. I mean, their documentary thoroughly debunked the anti-Semitism crisis. So you did not need to go, well, look at what the Guardian is saying. Look at what the Guardian is saying. Look at what the Independent is saying. It's just like, you know what? Al Jazeera has just thoroughly debunked all the smear campaigns against Jackie Walker and other people. And yet Corbyn's communications director, Seamus Milne, who I think also did such a bad job of being a communications director. I'm
afraid that's true. Seamus would have been better, actually, if he'd have stayed working at The Guardian, writing op-eds on really important issues, and writing books, etc. He's writing a book now, and I think that's where his strength is. His strength wasn't in being a communications director, because the communication strategy was disastrous. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? And we've seen what happened. And it just seemed that they never came to learn from the light of experience. They keep, you might sort of forgive the sort of appeasement strategy if you tried it once, maybe even twice, and it didn't work. But when you keep trying it over and over and over and over again, and it continues to not just not work, but actually make matters even worse, you think, it's Einstein's definition of insanity, isn't it? Keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result.
Yeah, and I think the Corbyn leadership, I think they also were appealing to too much of these token left, or as the World Socialist website would call the pseudo left. Those like Owen Jones and Paul Mason, and then of course Navarra Media later also became just this this thing. And as Jackie also said, she said when she was part of Momentum, it really was a campaigning organization that actually even wanted to target MPs who weren't who weren't moving to the left, kind of like what's popular in the U.S. You have Republicans who are always primarying other Republicans for not being right enough, and although although it's not been a success of the Democratic Party, but you do have people who are trying to challenge a Nancy Pelosi and trying to primary her by saying, hey, you need to be an actual party of the people. But then Momentum just became this controlled opposition racket by John Landsman, in which they would just put up the occasional YouTube videos of vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
Although to be fair to Momentum, I mean, in the 2017 election campaign, I mean, I think it was really down to Momentum that I did as well as I did in my own seat and won it back for Labour. They mobilised, huge numbers of people, but not just in Derby North, but right across the country. And they produced some excellent, eye-catching, innovative videos, and used social media incredibly effectively. And I think if they'd have continued in that vein, because what I hope that Momentum would do would be this kind of social movement, as it were, and would start to mobilise in communities, particularly excluded communities, particularly communities that had overwhelmingly given up on the political process, and that frankly would have been a huge benefit, and would, I believe, have transformed the landscape. But unfortunately, after the 2017, they then became part of the problem, really, and many of their leading lights, particularly John Landsman, became kind of the witchfinder general, as it were. But just your point, though, about Jeremy and his teams trying to placate the sort of liberal left, as it were. I'm not so much sure about that, to be honest, because I think had Jeremy taken a stronger stand on some of these issues, I believe that many of those characters, like the Owen Joneses of this world, would have fallen into line. I think they kind of almost took their lead from Jeremy in many ways. His unwillingness to speak out against the witch hunt, his acceptance of the anti-Semitism crisis, because it gave the impression that Jeremy's continual apologising gave the impression that the Labour Party was institutionally anti-Semitic. I mean, many people don't pay close attention, do they, to politics, and we know the way the media works and so on. And this impression was given that there was a major problem. I mean, it was straight out of the kind of George Orwell's sort of 1984 tactic, and it sort of turned the whole world upside down. Really, the anti-racists became the racists, and the racists became the anti-racists.
I mean that is true. I think even if Owen Jones and Paul Mason went along with their buddies, at the Guardian, the Independent, and Channel 4 in continuing to undermine Jeremy Corbyn, especially on the foreign policy front, and especially on the foreign policy front, but as you mentioned, and I'm never popular when I'm in the comments sections of Media Lens's Facebook page when I always say this, and I keep saying this to people. I was like, guys, you can be pissed off at the media all you want. You can be pissed off at the Tory party all you want. You can even be pissed off at the enemies in the Labour Party all you want. But the moment Jeremy Corbyn, Emily Thornberry, Rebecca Long-Bailey, even people I actually really do like and respect, like Faiza Shaheen, and the moment all of those people said there is an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, I'm sorry, they dug their own graves, and they just gave all of their opponents within Labour and outside of Labour all the ammunition they needed to be like, okay, we got this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They made it much so. I mean, look, the media doesn't do the Labour Party any favours at the best of times, unless, of course, you have an establishment sort of patsy like Blair or this character now, Keir Starmer. But the fact was that much of the ammunition that the media were using was provided by Labour Party members, senior Labour Party members, and. It just made the job so much easier for them, really. In that sense, they didn't really necessarily even have to invent stories, although they still did do a bit of that. But they could rely upon people inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, people on the kind of liberal left, as it were, to provide the ammunition that they put into their machine gun, their metaphorical machine gun, and used it to take down so many people in the Labour Party and ultimately take down Jeremy Corbyn himself.
With friends like these, who needs enemies, right?
Well, indeed. Well, just on that phrase, interestingly, Len McCluskey said that to me because of my stance on democratising the Labour Party, and he didn't like the fact that I was continuing to press for open selections of MPs, and I called out the fact that he had led his own delegation to vote against their own policy for open selections of MPs, and I'd written an op-ed for the Morning Star whilst the 2018 conference was still in session, and obviously he read that and saw that and saw red, and he then cornered me in the exhibition area at the conference and gave me a piece of his mind, as it were. But one of the things he said to me was that because I kept telling him that he had voted against Unite's own policy, and he said it's also Unite's policy to support the leader, and I told him that obviously I supported the leader, that's why I was campaigning for greater democracy. And he said, well, with a few choice F words inserted, but basically we said that with friends like you, he doesn't need enemies, which I thought was a bit unfair, which I made clear to him, but which
it's the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite thing. It's actually with people like him, no wonder people.
Well, yeah, indeed. It's a sadness, really. I mean, I was very disappointed again with Len. I mean, and indeed, the Unite officials who went along with that. I don't think it reflected Unite. I mean, I'm a member of Unite. I mean, but I don't think it reflected Unite grassroots members at all. I mean, and, when we talk about democracy, I think there's a need for greater democracy inside the trade union movements as well. But interestingly, after that confrontation in the exhibition area of the conference, I was contacted by a leading newspaper journalist to say that they'd heard that I'd had a confrontation with Len, and I said I hadn't. I didn't know where they got that information from. In fact, I asked him who told him that, and he said, "Oh, well, we can't reveal our sources." I said, "Well, I don't know who's told you, but that's completely inaccurate. We had a conversation, but we didn't have any confrontation or anything like that."
A heated conversation.
yeah. Well, I did. Basically, I didn't think there was no point in washing your dirty linen in public. I mean, this was a kind of a hostile news reporter in that sense, and I thought, well, I don't want to particularly give them a story, but they then went to Unite and they doubled down on it and said, yes, absolutely. Len gave Chris Williamson a piece of his mind, and Chris Williamson, disgraceful, blah blah blah. So I just think, you're absolutely right. With friends like that, you don't need enemies. And look, the old trade union labour movement maxim is that unity is strength. And regrettably, people who should have known better, you don't expect much from the right wing. Although, frankly, when Jeremy was elected in 2015, I did expect them to fall into line, just as I accepted when right-wingers had become leaders of the party. But, of course, they wouldn't. But you certainly expect unity from people who profess to be socialists, who profess to have supported Jeremy Corbyn, and profess their undying commitment to solidarity. And, of course, it wasn't there from so many of them. And that's what caused the difficulties for the Labour Party, for the movement, and ultimately led to the disastrous election result and the destruction of the Corbyn project.
All righty. Well, now, my first official question, actually, because we were on that topic of, the fake anti-Semitism crisis and Keir Starmer, I'm gonna get question one was about the coronavirus, but I'll try to save that later on the interview, and just go to question number two, which is what are your thoughts on the sacking of Rebecca Long-Bailey, and how ironic her sacking was, given she supported making it easier to kick out people over alleged anti-Semitism, and is this a sign? And is this a sign that anyone who's even to the modest left of her, Keir Starmer, is going to be kicked out? And then also, for people who may not know, explain also why Rebecca Long-Bailey was not kicked out of the Labour Party, but why she was sacked from her position in the Labour Party.
Yeah, well, it was a partisan move by Keir Starmer. That's very, very obvious in my opinion. Rebecca was the shadow education secretary in the shadow cabinet. She had been a contender for the leadership, but she unfortunately had bought into the narrative about the anti-Semitism crisis. She'd met with the so-called Jewish Labour movement around the time that I was suspended and then reinstated. And she told them that I had, allegedly anyway, reportedly told them that I had no place in the Labour Party. She signed up to the Board of Deputies 10 pledges, which they asked all candidates for leadership to sign up to, which included, this was 10 commitments to deal with the so-called alleged anti-Semitism crisis inside the Labour Party. One of the pledges was that no member should share a platform or promote anybody who has been suspended or expelled. And if they do that, then they themselves should be suspended or expelled. So she kind of went along with that. But she was the supposed candidate to the continuity Corbyn candidate in the election. And she did her best, I suppose, in the election to try and sort of, make that argument. But I think her position had been undermined by some of the way in which she had responded to some of those issues and how she hadn't spoken up for people like myself and indeed many others.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just abstained from the election, didn't feel that they could vote for anybody. And some, if you like, held their nose and voted for him. Others didn't feel there was a huge difference between her and Starmer. I mean, and maybe the difference wasn't that great, but there was a fairly big yawning chasm between the two. Not as big as between Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn himself.
At least on the domestic fronts.
Yes, really, yeah, I think so. I mean, and for example, Rebecca was supporting the teaching unions' concern about forcing the reopening of schools prematurely because of the risk to health, not just of the teaching staff, but obviously the kids, but also their relatives. As we know, what we do know anyway about the coronavirus is that although young people don't tend to have very severe symptoms or any symptoms at all, it tends to be older people, but they can be carriers. And so the concern was that they could infect teaching staff and indeed go home and infect their parents or grandparents and, increase the death toll as a consequence. And so there was very real concerns about that. And Rebecca was supporting the unions, but the unions' position on that. But Keir Starmer wasn't, and I think this was a convenient excuse to get rid of her. I mean, she shared an article was written by Maxine Peake, an accomplished actor in Britain, who's on the left. And within that article, there was a reference. It was a long interview, actually, that was published in the Independent newspaper, and Rebecca Long-Bailey merely shared it and said that Maxine Peake is a diamond, I think was the original offending tweet, believe it or not. And just a link to this article.
She was a perfect example of, of our wonderful...
Yeah, that's kind of thing. And just within that, because Maxine had, spoken out within this lengthy interview, which covered a whole host of different topics from domestic issues to international policy, and she expressed solidarity with the Palestinian people and referred to the terrible murder of George Floyd, and the links between the Israeli police tactics, the security service tactics which are deployed against the Palestinian people, and the parallels between that and what happened to George Floyd, and the fact that the Israeli security services provide training for many police departments in the US, and she was bringing those two things together. This was then deemed by Keir Starmer as a anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. I mean, it's just complete absurdity. Ironically, however, if we're talking about anti-Semitic, tenuous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, a fellow shadow cabinet member, or certainly a front bencher, I'm not sure if he's in the shadow cabinet, but he's certainly on the front bench. I think he is a shadow cabinet member, actually. Steve Reed also published a what could have been deemed an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. He referred to a prominent Jewish donor of the Conservative Party as a Tory puppet master, and it was alleged this was an anti-Semitic trope. He did subsequently apologise for that and delete it, but nevertheless, the kind of damages that were been done, and if in this ridiculous febrile atmosphere,
the rich oligarchs influence the people they give money to, and if you can't,
I didn't know this guy.
You can't call any rich oligarch, okay. Even if the guy was Jewish, there's nothing anti-Semitism about calling some rich oligarch donating to such and such a candidate or such and such a party as a puppet master. This is why we use language like oligarchs to describe the Russian system, oligarchs to even describe the U.S. system, and there's a term I actually wanted to discuss with you about the UK system, a plutocracy, but.
Well, look, I didn't even know this guy was Jewish. I mean, it's the first time I've discovered it. I mean, in fact, there are many people now friends of mine who I've known for, well, I say many, a number of people anyway, who I've known for many, I mean, some people I've known for over 40 years. And when this whole crisis emerged, it sort of told me that they were themselves Jewish. Although many of them joked on and said things like, but we're the wrong type of Jew, or this type of thing, It's basically anti-Zionist Jews and so on. I mean, I'm not really interested in people's sort of identity in that sense and what kind of religion they happen to follow and so on. But yeah, I mean, so it's just absurdity. I mean, the whole absurdity of it, it's quite breathtaking that the lengths that they go to. And, this is not going to end well. I mean, and, when you see that they're continuing to even complain about the likes of Steve Reed. Interesting, though, as I say, Starmer didn't take any action against Steve Reed, even though people have been calling for his instant dismissal from the front bench, as it were. So, but but as far as Rebecca Long Bailey is concerned, she's not been suspended from the Labour Party as such. She's lost her role on the front bench or in the shadow cabinet, and she now has this stigma attached to her name, like I have actually, that she's in some way an anti-Semite. And but there is an irony there, given that she'd sought the appeasement strategy.
Exactly.
Wasn't prepared to offer solidarity with me, Jackie, or anybody else for that matter, in the hope that would, as it were, absolve her and protect her, and it didn't, and it won't.
It's crazy. It's
a salutary lesson, but whether people have learned it or not, I still don't know. I mean, because Rebecca, wrote a lengthy article, then another lengthy article in the Guardian, profusely apologising and so on. Yeah, even Maxine Peake has been intimidated.
But what's so weird and what's so stupid about Rebecca Long Bailey being sacked, and by the way, I actually don't shed any tears for Rebecca Long Bailey being sacked, because it's one of those things where, like, hey, you chose this side of yours, to tar and feather people and to slander people, and karma is a bitch. You're getting a taste of your own medicine. That being said, that's my own personal opinions. But the fact of the matter is, she's sharing an interview of a member of the Labour Party, Maxine Peake, who, as you say, is this revered actress, and she is a true socialist, unlike all these people who claim, I joined the Labour Party because of Jeremy Corbyn, and then they also, anyways. She is a true Corbynista and all, and all that jazz. And, but Rebecca Long Bailey is just sharing an interview and didn't even reference in her tweets. I completely agree with what Maxine Peake said about, Israel training, brutal regimes across the world, and the brutal racist police of the United States. I mean, Rebecca Long Bailey did not say that. She was just praising Maxine Peake. Because, as you mentioned, this was a lengthy interview in a popular newspaper, The Independent, and she's sacked because of one offhand comment Maxine Peake said. And even then, not a controversy, because it's true. But of course, if you are an Israeli apologist and you think that Israel doesn't do anything wrong, to Palestine or or to the world, that yeah, I can understand if you're so thin-skinned about it, but still, it's
mind-blowing, really. But there we are. That's the modern Labour Party, sadly.
All right, and then before I get into this question, you mentioned COVID-19, and for people like me who just can't watch the BBC and can't watch the UK corporate state press because of what happened with the last election, and just cannot stomach the deception and seeing all of these Blairites and these Tory people as commentators, but we still need to watch them every now and then just to get a little bit of an idea of what's happening what's happening in Britain. So I want to ask you this question, which is how is the UK been faring during the ongoing coronavirus crisis, and what has the dominant media how has the dominant media been in suppressing a lot of the grave things of the ruling Tory party's handling of the coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it varies, to be honest. I mean, I think there has been some criticism, and it's interesting, I think, that I don't believe Keir Starmer, for example, has performed particularly well. That's not just a partisan point. I think his modus operandi as leader of the opposition has been very lacklustre, to say the least, and they believe they've let the Tories off the hook. I mean, the key is in the name, the leader of the opposition, and he's not been really showing much opposition, it seems to me. He refers to it as constructive opposition. Yeah, he's been given a very easy ride, and support indeed by the mainstream or sections of the mainstream media. And so, yeah, I mean, the coverage hasn't been great. I mean, I think they have been let off the hook to a large extent, the Conservatives, when you consider that the death rate per capita in Britain is the highest in the world, actually. It's even worse in America per capita as a proportion.
Even worse than the US.
Even worse than the US, yeah. The number of deaths per 100,000 or whatever the statistic was is the highest in the world, yeah. Given the size of the population, etc. So yeah, I mean, but I mean, there has been some, exposés of that, some criticism of that, but it's been fairly muted, I've got to say. I mean, they've not really, as journalists, if you like, as a news outlets, covered themselves in any great glory in terms of getting to the nub of the story and exposing the absolutely shameless way in which this government has conducted itself. I mean, first of all, they talked about a herd immunity idea, where basically just got to let it rip. A load of people are going to die. In fact, Boris Johnson told people to be prepared for losing loved ones before their time. Then, of course, he himself contracted and nearly died by all accounts. And frankly, had he not been the Prime Minister, I'm told from people in the know that he might very well have died, given the level of treatment that was available for mere mortals, as it were, in some hospitals. And I know that in some places, I mean, literally, they couldn't get oxygen. I mean, there was just no oxygen available for people and so on. So, yeah, I mean, so many people lost their lives because of the lack of the medicines and the equipment that they needed. We know that we've lost far too many health workers because of the lack of personal protective equipment. And so, no, the media's not been great, but it's a bit like a curious egg. It's been good in parts, as it were, but given the scale of what's happening, given the fact that, as I say, it is the highest per capita death rate in the world, and if you imagine this was a Corbyn government, I mean, there'd be the headlines, the screaming headlines would be constant, and they've been very, very muted. So no, it's not great, but not to be unexpected, really. I mean, this is you don't really ever expect the mainstream media to really give the Conservatives a hard time, and they often make excuses for them, and that really trend has just simply continued.
And how much has this is a stupid question, but but I have to ask it. But how much has basically the destruction of the NHS and years of austerity going back to the 1970s all the way up until now, in which people have to realize this, because I think this is still a shock for British people, that the NHS is no longer the NHS. It's no longer this wonderful single payer healthcare system, that it was, with a few problems, but the NHS has effectively been privatized. It has effectively been privatized officially under the Cameron-Clegg coalition government, and again, so yes. So my question is, how much has that played a part in the coronavirus crisis being so bad for for the people of the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think
including Scotland and Wales.
Sure, no, well, the cuts have certainly had an impact. There's no doubt in my mind about that, and this dash to privatise as much of the NHS as possible. I mean, much of it is obviously still in public hands, but it's underfunded. There is a presumption now in favour of privatisation. The Health and Social Care Act officially provided for 49% of the NHS to be privatised, and as we go forward, I mean, there is a drive in that direction. There is a shortage of trained staff, and that has undoubtedly contributed to the death rate. But the other thing, of course, is the grinding levels of poverty in Britain have also contributed, and the statistics also show, probably unsurprisingly, that people from poorer communities have fared far worse than people from more affluent communities in the country. And I think that's the same in the States and elsewhere in the world. And so you're seeing a lot more working class people falling victim to the coronavirus, a lot more working class people dying as a consequence of the contracting the coronavirus. And then, of course, the inadequate support that's been provided to the NHS has also been a factor, although the health staff have done an amazing job, it's got to be said, and have been incredibly selfless in the way in which they've stuck to the task. Both my daughter and my partner work in the NHS, and they've obviously continued to go in every day and try and do their bit, as it were. But yeah, I mean, I think had we had a different environment, if we'd have had a more equal country, no poverty in Britain, if we'd got public services that were properly resourced, and it's not just the NHS, it's the care staff. I mean, my mother-in-law is a very elderly and infirm woman now, and she has carers going in, but at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak in this country, and for weeks after, the carers were coming to her home with no PPE, no personal protective equipment available at all. I mean, that's improved a bit now. We also know that people were being discharged from hospitals into care homes full of vulnerable elderly people with the symptoms of coronavirus, and that was then infecting other residents. And so it's been a catastrophe, frankly. I mean, we've seen people lose their lives who have gone into hospital, but also many thousands of people have lost their lives outside of the hospital setting, in care homes and in people's own homes. So, the whole system is broken, really. And one of the reasons I believe, particularly in terms of the care staff, the social care, that has been almost universally privatized now. I mean, and when I first started becoming interested in politics and got involved and joined the Labour Party and became active in the mid-1970s, social care staff, it was all virtually exclusively provided, certainly in the community, by staff who were directly employed by the local authority, who were on decent salaries. I mean, not huge salaries, but they had good terms and conditions. They were entitled to a pension, and these were dedicated people. And I'm not saying the people they're doing now are not necessarily dedicated, but they're very badly underpaid. they're not well treated. They don't have the personal protective equipment that they needed at the outset, for example. Had it been, a different system, a publicly provided system, then I'm pretty certain that the PPE would have been a high priority, and it would have been provided. And I think we could have saved so many more people's lives. And you look at what's happened elsewhere in Western Europe, and the death toll is nowhere near as high as it's been in Britain. So no, the whole approach, from the lockdown being delayed to the inadequate support that's been available over a long period of time for our public services, they've taken a wrong turn at every opportunity, it seems, and that's clearly contributed to this catastrophe that has befallen the country now.
One last thing I wanted to ask then about the ongoing coronavirus crisis. Well, okay, two last things that that can be merged together is do you think that Boris Johnson's Tory government are guilty of criminal negligence, and do you think that this ridiculous back to work, back to school scheme, which is not just happening in Britain, so I don't want to just beat up Britain about that. It's happening where I live in Belgium, and all throughout Europe. They're all doing this ridiculous, suicidal, reckless back to work, back to school scheme, and then they wonder why all of a sudden the rates of coronavirus are going up. And I thought that that nobody was going to be allowed to fly until they really got the whole coronavirus crisis under control. But a friend of mine, one of my best friends, was saying to me that he went back to his home country of Italy to visit some people. He didn't tell me if he went by train or by plane, but I thought to myself, that's strange. And now I'm hearing from another friend of mine that she's going to be, flying to, to Turkey. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, but the coronavirus crisis is still there, and it's pretty hard to do social distancing 2 meters apart when you're on a bloody plane.
No, absolutely, yeah.
And no. In the UK itself, So do you think Boris Johnson has been criminally negligent on the whole? When shit was about to hit the fan, and what's your reaction to the stupid back to work, back to school scheme?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been accused of social murder, hasn't he? I mean, not just in relation to the coronavirus, but just in terms of and not just him either. I mean, David Cameron before him, Theresa May, in terms of the austerity programme that they've pursued and the impact that that's had on working class communities and disabled people in particular. And the approach definitely in relation to the coronavirus, I think, has seen a number of people accuse him in very sort of harsh terms in the way in which he's carried on and sort of supposedly led the response to the coronavirus. I mean, I think in terms of the back to school approach, back to work, I mean, I think it has been reckless, and it seems that they are driven more about the economy, the impact on kind of big business, than they have been in relation to public health. And of course, they have been forced into a situation where they've been providing some support, which has cost a lot of public money, where they are or have been supporting 80% salary for furloughed employees and providing some support for self-employed workers. But there have been quite a few people that have fallen through the gaps and have had no support at all. So even that approach, whilst in some ways is welcome and is unexpected from a sort of ideologically right-wing monetarist conservative government, to be spending.
Boris would say, Chris, listen, my good friends, we are one nation conservative party.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
That's how he would say that. He would say that.
No, indeed. I mean, but if you'd have said a few, year or so ago that the Conservative government led by Boris Johnson would be engaged in this level of, fiscal stimulus into the economy, you'd have said that would have been very unlikely, to say the least. And they've been forced into that situation. But even that's been a bit ham-fisted. I mean, I think it could have been done a lot more simply and ensured that nobody fell through the gaps, but many people have fallen through the gaps. And of course, that's contributed to some of the difficulties that, many people have been experiencing. So, no, I mean, I think you just need to listen to the experts. You need to look at what's been happening elsewhere around the world. And I think this kind of dash to get kids back to school, these constant U-turns that they keep making. I mean, obviously they force kids back to school, then they say, oh no, maybe that's not the right thing to do on reflection when they saw what was happening and so on. Now we've seen Leicester being sort of locked down again, and that's almost certain to happen, I think, in other towns and cities. And I mean, I think if they'd have locked down sooner and were more stringent in terms of the way in which that was done earlier, then we might have been in a much better position by now. But look, we're in unknown territory, aren't we, with this coronavirus? And I just think we should be prioritising public health rather than the sort of profits. And look, the country can afford to do this. It's not really an issue, it seems to me. We have our own sovereign currency. We are a currency issuer in the country, and we should be doing what is the right thing by the majority of the public. And it's I think reckless, to say the least, to examine what this government has been doing in forcing people back to work. And although they, in the face of it, in the earlier part of it, claiming that they were prioritising public health when they eventually did agree to the lockdown, now it seems that they're moving away from that. Remains to be seen what will happen if there is another spike. That they may be forced into yet another U-turn, but unfortunately, many people end up unnecessarily losing their lives in order to prove the point.
Well, hopefully, everyone keeps continuing to wear their hospital masks and all that, and if only we had if only Britain had a true opposition left party, which wanted to repeal the Social Care Act. That was the name of it, right?
Yeah, Health and Social Care Act. Yeah.
Yeah, and reintroduce the original NHS NHS bill, and even expand it to social to those who do social care as well.
We should do that
as well as mental health care as well.
No, of course, no. I mean, absolutely. That is the absolute priority, or should be. I mean, that was one of the things that Jeremy was speaking about a lot, actually. The importance of investing in mental ill health, and that's been a Cinderella service in the National Health Service, and wanted to give that equal parity. And I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric spoken about this from all parties, but frankly, actions speak louder than words. And I would like to think that a Corbyn-led Labour government would have put the resources in there. And similarly, in relation to social care, there's a desperate need there for there to be a massive turnaround, a change. We need to bring that back into the public sphere. We need to, in my opinion, remove all of the private contracts. It's frankly, the private sector should have no place in delivering any public service, but certainly not social care. I mean, that should not be used as a cash cow.
Not everything needs to be not everything needs to be made into a profit. Although I would say, why even have a profit system to begin with? And I remember watching John Pilger's fantastic documentary, The Dirty War on the NHS. Yes. And in that documentary, he talked with somebody who takes care of homeless people and giving them shelter. Talked with another person who is a doctor in the NHS, and both of them said that you actually have NHS staffers, people who work in the NHS, who are also homeless.
Yes, indeed. I mean,
who are rough sleeping and still go to work even though they've just been sleeping.
Incredible, yeah. It's a low-paid occupation for many of the people that work in the NHS. Are not well paid at all, and that's compounded, particularly in places like London, where the price of accommodation is excessive. And the private rented sector was deregulated by Margaret Thatcher in the mid-1980s. Nothing was done about that when the so-called Labour government was in office from 1997 to 2010. They didn't build any council houses to speak of. In fact, Margaret Thatcher's government built more council houses per year than when they were built under the new Labour government, actual council houses. And ironically, it's the Tories in this iteration, well, initially with the coalition and now the Conservatives governing on their own. But in 2012, sorry, was it? Yes, no, let me think about this. No, it was a little bit later than that, actually. It was, but the government, anyway, this Conservative government has lifted the restrictions on building council houses. There used to be a cap on something called the housing revenue account, that local authorities could not, go above that debt cap in terms of their sort of council housing commitments. And that has now been lifted. So there is no impediment now on local authorities. And of course, housing is a different to many other types of public spending, because there is an income stream which is generated from that. And so to all intents and purposes, it almost kind of pays for itself, because the income stream will service any loan charges that are required for the development costs and the land purchase. But many local authorities own the land anyway. So whilst there's been a little bit of a renaissance in council housing, it's nowhere near enough. And one of the things I was arguing for is, and indeed still am arguing for, and part of the grassroots resistance movement that we are trying to build, we want to bring pressure to local level and local authorities to use the powers at their disposal to tackle the housing crisis, to, if they haven't got the skilled labour, which will be a problem, because you can't just turn the tap on, you need to train people up to, build the properties, the journey work, the bricklaying, the roofers and plumbers and electricians, etc. But local authorities have the ability now to do that, and that's what they should be doing. There should be a huge renaissance in council housing. That would not only help to address a housing problem, a social need, but it would also help to generate many, many jobs as well. And funnily enough, actually reduce the social security bill, because the cost of renting in the private sector is so excessive, and many people are trapped in private rented accommodation on relatively, decent salaries, but because the rents are so high, they can't afford to save up to put down a deposit to buy their own property. And there's no council houses to speak of that they can move into to either live there permanently, or to use the lower rents in order to save for a deposit to go and buy in the private sector. And so you have this crazy situation, and the only people that's benefiting from it, it seems to me, are the private landlords. And, nothing is really being done about that. And of course, the other thing that local authorities could be doing is introducing a redistributive council tax budget. Again, powers made available to them by the Conservatives. In 2012, they passed something called the 2012 Local Government Finance Act, which gave local authorities the ability to offer differential discounts to people in different council tax bands, depending on how expensive your property actually is, based on 1990 valuations, believe it or not. This is a kind of antiquated system that was introduced in a panic in the response to the poll tax, which was a disastrous Tory policy that Margaret Thatcher pushed through and actually cost her premiership, which was replaced by John Major. So local authorities can now, thanks to legislation that was passed by the Tories in 2012, offer this differential discount, where they could actually put the burden onto the richest people in the borough by having a big increase on the big houses, on big mansions, and then freezing it or reducing it for the vast majority of residents. But they don't do it. Nobody's done it, and it's a real shame.
There's a great documentary, for people who, who this topic may be completely, another language for them. But there's a great documentary called, I think it's called The Great Social Housing Swindle. I think that's what the documentary is called. Maxine Peake was a narrator in the documentary, and that goes into the whole housing, the whole housing crisis. Yeah. So next question I wanted to ask you, and this is and this is going to be sort of like dissecting the British state, a political anatomy of the British state. So I want to ask you this question, which is the UK a liberal democracy, and if so, what are the serious limitations of it? Because doesn't capitalism always win over democracy in the end?
Yes, I'm afraid it does. I frankly have lost faith in the democratic system in this country. The system of so-called representative democracy has really failed. the British people. We are, or were certainly before the lockdown. Remains to be seen where we stand when things get back to normal. But Britain is a big economy. Was the fifth biggest economy in the world by GDP, and yet we have 14 million people living in poverty in Britain. Thousands of people sleeping on the streets. Millions of people in precarious employment. And if our representative liberal democracy was effective, was working, then that would not be the case. And Jeremy made a very laudable commitment, Jeremy Corbyn, to eradicating rough sleeping, street homelessness during the lifetime of a Labour government, had one been elected under his leadership. But that's the minimum we should have been doing. I think we were, far too modest in our proposals there. I mean, what I would have liked to have seen is a Labour government committing to eradicating poverty in the lifetime of a Labour government. Nobody in what is the fifth biggest economy in the world should be living in poverty. And were we to address the scandal of poverty, not only would that have a huge beneficial impact on the individuals affected in terms of life expectancy and so on, it would make for a much better society, a much more a society which is much more at ease with itself. If we could, eliminate poverty and reduce inequality, levels of petty theft and crime, which is often driven by desperation, would be eliminated. We should also, in my opinion, as well, liberalise the drug laws. I mean, I say that as a vegan teetotal non-smoker. But frankly, people will take drugs, and we need to recognise that fact. And rather than treating drug abuse as a criminal justice issue, it should be treated as a public health question. And were we to do that, were we to make these sorts of radical changes, I think it would have a hugely beneficial impact.
But that wasn't. Actually, I wasn't even expecting on even talking about the drug war. So that's interesting. That's interesting that you brought that. So that's interesting that you brought that up, and that kind of goes into what you were talking about with mental health, and even wanting to expand a new NHS to include a universal mental health care system, because but the Labour Party under the social justice warrior Jeremy Corbyn, I don't think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the two-party manifestos even mentioned an end to the war on drugs, right?
No, you're right. And, people are, again, timid about this. And I think, frankly, we need to be just telling the truth, really. I mean, one of the things that look, Jeremy was a mate anyway before he was elected as the leader. We were friends during my time in Parliament from 2010 to 2015. But no, I mean, in my opinion, when Jeremy became the leader and his campaign to become the leader, one of the slogans was straight talking, honest politics, and it was that sense of giving a common sense approach. And when there was that terrible bombing atrocity, I think it was at the Manchester Arena during the election campaign in 2017. Jeremy made a speech a day or two after that, and much against actually many of his advisors' better judgment, but he acknowledged the impact of Britain's foreign policy, that was creating alienation and was partly responsible for that atrocity on that occasion, and that we needed to have a different approach on foreign policy to not only was that the right thing to do internationally, but also it would make us safer at home. And I think the same is true in relation to drugs. But no, I mean, people are far too timid. I think they're far too worried about what the media will say. And frankly, even some of the right-wing media are ahead of where some of the politicians are at. There's this perceived fear about speaking out on this issue, for fear that's they'll be demonized as a sort of as a crank and extremist or whatever. But in fact, some of the right-wing newspapers are taking a more considered approach than even the politicians are. So it's come to something when the right-wing media, the right-wing gutter press, are more informed or more kind of enlightened on this issue than even the politicians are. But no, we should absolutely be speaking out.
Sorry to interrupt, but so the Daily Mail on Sunday, the Daily Express, and even the Daily Telegraph So they've actually been an advocates of actually reforming the drug laws.
I'm not sure about the Daily Mail and so on, and I'm not sure which newspapers in particular, but I believe that the Sun has talked, in some areas anyway. I mean, they're not as radical as what I would like to see. Frankly, as I say, I mean, I'm somebody who, as I've already said,
because the Mail on Sunday has Peter Hitchens, who's an anti-prohibitionist fundamentalist on that issue.
But so I mean, I guess in some ways, that kind of right-wing libertarian streak will sort of come to the fore in that sense. But no, I mean, I just think, just sort of practically, even in countries where you're subject to the death penalty for drug offences, it doesn't stop people. And in those extreme circumstances, given those extreme circumstances, it's pretty clear that whatever you do, as long as you treat it as a criminal justice system, it's never going to work. It's never going to actually deal with the problem. And I remember speaking at a Labour Party conference, or it was the twin, the one that ran parallel with it, the World Transform, that was organised by Momentum. I think that was in 2018, and I was speaking on a platform about drug reform, and I was the last speaker. And the woman that spoke before me gave an incredibly moving presentation. And she spoke about her daughter, who was only 15 years of age and lost her life to an overdose of ecstasy. And she was very in favour of drug reform, of liberalisation of the drug laws. And she said, look, her daughter would still be alive today had there been a liberalised approach, a regulated approach to the drug laws in this country. Because the reason she took an overdose of ecstasy was that the tablet that she had taken, and she'd taken these tablets before she discovered, it looked exactly the same as all the other tablets that she'd taken, which had been fine. But this was 10 times the strength of the other ones that she'd previously taken. And so, it was the overdose. It was, she'd effectively was sort of taking the equivalent of 10 ecstasy pills, and that took her, this young little girl's life, this 15-year-old girl's life. She said, I saw my daughter take her last breath in the same hospital that I gave birth to her in 15 years beforehand. If we treated this as a public health issue, if we regulated and regularized the drugs market, people will take drugs, sadly. I mean, I wish people didn't take drugs. I wish people didn't smoke, but I think the way to deal with this is through public health education. But if it was regulated in that way, then she would still be alive, because she would have still been able to, access, no doubt, the ecstasy tablet, but it would have been one that was of a particular strength that she could rely upon, that wouldn't, kill her in that sense. So, yeah, I mean, it's hopefully it will come. I mean, it's interesting actually, because when I was a member of Parliament, I was a member of I wasn't a member of many all-party parliamentary groups, but one of them I was a member of was the one on drug reform, and there's one or two Tories in there as well who have a more enlightened approach to this, and obviously it was mainly Labour, and there's a few Liberal Democrats as well. But it's far too few, and we need the public to speak out more. I mean, this is where I come back to this point about this kind of failure of our kind of a liberal representative democracy. It ain't working. Who are they representing? They're not representing the people, clearly, because if they were, then we wouldn't have these levels of poverty. We wouldn't have this public health scandal in relation to the drug laws. We wouldn't have people sleeping on the streets. We wouldn't have the housing crisis that we got. We wouldn't have millions of people in precarious employment. We wouldn't have the kind of mortality rate in poor communities being considerably worse than people in more affluent communities. So I mean, one of the things that we've been advocating now as part of this new burgeoning grassroots movement that we're trying to build now, is for a move towards a more participatory democratic system where people have a greater influence over their own lives in that sense, and over the policy makers. And in a sense, that was what I was arguing for when I was campaigning for democracy inside the Labour Party. I was basically wanting participatory democracy for Labour Party members, because I wanted members not to simply have the right to determine who their candidates were in elections, but also to have the right to determine policy and things like that. And frankly, my opinion anyway, and I was making this point very forcibly and was getting a lot of support, which is one of the reasons I was targeted, I think. But overwhelmingly, members bought into that narrative. Because my view is that if you put the grassroots members in the driving seat in terms of determining and driving policy, they're much more in touch with the wider general public because they live and work and socialise in the local constituencies where members of parliament represent, and by the very nature of the role as an MP, you have to be away from the constituency. But so not only just in terms of selecting candidates, but also in terms of driving policy, you would get policy, I believe, that more reflected what is important to the vast majority of the British public, rather than policymakers, many of whom have lived cosseted lifestyles. Good luck to them. I mean, great if you're born to a wealthy family, but if you've never had a life experience, if you've never wanted for anything in your life, if you've never struggled to put food on the table or worry about paying the rent, or be in a job which you hate, that doesn't particularly pay the bills. If you've never gone through those life experiences, then it's very difficult, I think, to kind of empathise and make good policy. Now, as I say, you can't help who your parents are. But if the Labour Party were to put its members in, as I say, in the driving seat, that would then help those elected members who've come from, cosseted lifestyle, from a privileged background, to make better policy, because the policy essentially would be driven by grassroots members of the party. And there's, at that point in time, when I was arguing for this case, I mean, Labour was the biggest party in Europe. It remains to be seen how big it is now after Keir Starmer has been at the helm for a few months and Jeremy Corbyn has gone, and the direction of travel that the parties are taking. But then, we had approaching 600,000 full members, several hundred thousand affiliated members as well, as associate members. So that's a huge pool of people who are in touch with the wider community, and I just think that is the right way to go. So I just think that one of the things I'm hoping that we can do is to really push for a different type of democracy. And when we eventually are able to formally launch the grassroots movement, the resistance movement at a festival of resistance, we will have a range of different speakers, but one of the key elements of the weekend will be that we will have speakers there from the Gilets jaunes movement in France, the Yellow Vest movement, who have been doing a brilliant job, I think, in resisting the neoliberal reforms that Macron has wanted to push through. So we're looking to find ways of inspiring people, to empower people. And one of the things I want to do, two things we want to do, is raise political consciousness and raise expectations. Because far too often, I think people are just given up on politics, given up on democracy, and just don't feel that, politics speaks to them, works for them.
Because liberal democracy. Because a liberal, democracy is, I just find there's too much limitations. It's too limited in a type of economic system it advocates. It's too limited in just like, we just need to have, a freedom of the press, and we just need to have, two competing or four competing parties. But something just isn't working, as we see with so many people who are disgruntled about the EU, so many people in the Democratic Party, disgruntled with that party, so many people in the Labour Party, and this has always been a problem of Labour, disgruntled in the Labour Party. And that being said, when you look at British history, in which Britain is often seen as a model of as a model of of what a liberal democracy should be, especially when the French Revolution went in the very scary direction with the Reign of Terror. So can you talk about how the Whig Party and how later they became the Liberal Party, in which they weren't really an opposition party, they were just sort of a rival oligarchic party, and dare I say at best a controlled opposition party.
No, they were. I mean, and we're in that situation now. Frankly, we're back to the Whigs and the Tories today, with the Labour and the Tory party, I'm afraid to say, and the Liberals were eventually replaced as the as the alternative political party in Britain by the Labour Representation Committee of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And, that, well, over the years, frankly, unfortunately, the Labour Party kind of lost its way. And yeah, when you look back at Labour's history from the first Labour government in 1924, I think it was, and even the 1945 to 51 Labour government, it has really been used as an instrument of the establishment to a large extent. And I think even that 45 government, which was a transformational government, could and indeed should have gone a lot further, in my opinion, in terms of the transformation that it brought about. Yes, it introduced the National Health Service and the welfare state and the council housing, etc. Interesting, much of this, demanded by and pressed for within the party by the left of the party, as it were, at the time. People like Nye Bevan, but of course this was. These reforms are something that were demanded from below. And having been through the war, my parents' generation, both my mother and father, were in the war and in the Second World War. And I remember speaking to my dad and my mother about that time and the way in which they voted and the impacts of that Labour government. And my dad was still overseas actually, and there were a lot of conversations going on about the election. And essentially what they were saying was that they weren't prepared to, having been through all the privations of war and all the sacrifices that they'd made and the things that they'd seen, they weren't prepared to go back to how it was before the war.
Yeah.
They wanted something different, something better, and that's what they voted for. But in 1951, Labour lost office, although interestingly they actually won the popular vote, a bit like Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. They won the popular vote.
I was quite surprised to read in history how Churchill, who everyone appreciated, his efforts winning the war, and the fact that he shifted from being this very Dickensian character into adopting some of the stuff that FDR fully adopted when he entered World War II, which is, you try to give everybody a job, in the war effort and so forth. But and Churchill was rejected.
I'm not sure
by
how
the electorate, but he was returned back in 1951.
It was, and that should never have happened. I think if Labour had sort of set its stall out properly, of course, one of the things that Nye Bevan and Harold Wilson actually went on subsequently to become the leader of the party and Prime Minister, resigned from the government over the decision to reintroduce prescription charges and some various health reforms, which they weren't prepared to tolerate. And this was done on the pretext of providing resources to fight another foreign intervention, joining the Korean War, as it were, with the United States, which they should never have ever been involved with. But of course, that was at a time when Britain was subject to the Bretton Woods Agreement and so on, and where tax, you could argue, did legitimately fund public services. That is no longer the case. But the point I was making, though, just in relation to Labour governments over the time from the 20s, even that 45 to 51 Labour government, the 64 to 70 government, and the 74 to 79 governments, and certainly the 97 to 2010 governments. Yeah. They didn't do enough, and actually the 97 to 2010 government, yes, there were some decent things done, but essentially it didn't unduly disturb the status quo and served as a tool for the establishment. And I just think that what that 45 to 51 Labour government ought to have been doing is investing a lot more in, if they did any, I'm not sure what they did in regards to this, but in terms of political education, raising political consciousness in that sense, and raising expectations and engaging with people and building that kind of social movement. This is what I was so enthused about with Jeremy Corbyn and what he was proposing, because there was this talk about Labour not just being a political party, but being a social movement, embedded in communities and being very much part of the community rather than separate from the community. And one of the things that I was always passionate about when I was leader of the council in Derby as well was to find ways in which we could do politics with people, not to people. I'm afraid we've gone back to doing politics to people again, I'm sorry to say. And, sound bites and photo opportunities. I mean, and that, it was a rather embarrassing photo opportunity that the leader and deputy leader of the party did for the taking the knee in his office for the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, again, I think actions speak louder than words, and the actions leave a lot to be desired.
Do you think that the reason why Labour became kind of the new Liberal Party, the new Whigs party, is because all of those people who were part of the Liberal Party basically, they didn't really have a home anymore. I mean, it was still there, but it was a insignificant party, and unfortunately, all of those liberals infiltrated the Labour Party. It's funny how how when Jeremy Corbyn and the People Power movement behind him got into power, there was all this talk like, oh my gosh, Jeremy Corbyn is letting in the hard left, he's letting in the trots, he's letting in every single derogatory term under the sun. But really, Labour's biggest problem was that they actually let the liberals in, and liberals are compassionate conservatives, right?
Well, I think the term compassionate conservatism is an oxymoron anyway. But I mean, yeah, I mean, look, you've got careerists essentially. People kind of join up. They use the Labour Party as a flag of convenience, or they sometimes will even claim to be on the left of the Labour Party in order to get a parliamentary seat and a career. And one of the things I was saying during my democracy campaign in the Labour Party is that being an MP is not a job, it's not a career. If you want a job or a career, go and work on a building site like I used to do, or get a job in a factory, or in an office, or in the health service, or in the city or something. Being an MP is a privilege, and you're there to represent the party and represent the people that elected you, not actually, to treat it as a career. When you start treating it as a career, as virtually all of them do, you then start making decisions based upon your career advancement, not on what is the right thing to do, or what is consistent with your principles, if you have any. I mean, many of the positions I took up in relation to Palestine, in relation to supporting people like Jackie Walker and Cyril Chilson and Tony Greenstein, Ken Livingstone, etc., I was advised not to do so because it wouldn't be good for my career. In fact, even in the 2017 election, I was told to distance myself from Jeremy because that would make it more difficult for me if I identified with Jeremy to get elected. And the most important thing to do was to get in to Parliament, and then we could regroup, as it were. And I said I wasn't prepared to do that because for two reasons really. One is I felt it was a kind of dishonourable thing to do anyway.
Exactly.
But secondly, I said that I didn't think that the electoral position would be damaged in any way, shape or form by the programme that Jeremy was advocating. I thought it would be a positive one. So far from actually distancing myself, I issued a press release to all the national media saying that I'm the most Corbyn-friendly candidate standing anywhere in the country in England's most marginal seat, which actually whetted the appetite of a lot of the right-wing media who descended on the constituency, all expecting me to fall flat on my face. And of course, we had a stunning victory in 2017 in Derby North and turned things around, substantially. But no, I mean, I think, if you have a platform, you have to stand up for what's right, what you believe in. And as I say, when you start treating the role as an MP as a career, then, as I say, you start making decisions based upon that, and that leads to bad policy, in my view. If you put the members in the driving seat, of course, that cuts that out, prevents that, stops that, and that's why I think Tony Benn once described democracy as the most revolutionary thing in the world. And I think what we've seen over the last few years gives that, brings that into sharp relief in that sense, in terms of what you're talking about there.
Do you think there could be a possibility where the Labour Party under her Starmer emerges with the Liberal Democrats?
Well, I mean, when Tony Blair was the leader, he did actually actively talk about that, didn't he? And he was having conversations with Paddy Ashdown, who was the leader of the Liberal Democrats at the time. Bear in mind, the Liberal Democrats are originally made up of Labour traitors, as it were, people who left the party in 1981 to establish the Social Democratic Party, so-called, led by the so-called Gang of Four: Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams, Bill Rogers, and Dr. David Owen. And, their main aim, it seemed, in life was to stop a socialist government coming to power, because at that point in time, Labour had Michael Foot.
And ironically, yeah, and ironically, they left because they didn't like Labour's position on the European Union. And Michael Foot, who I don't think should have been leader, even if he may have had the right ideas. Tony Benn would have been a much better leader. Even if he had lost, he would have been a much better leader, much more inspiring, knew how to talk to people, and was much more, camera friendly. And then, yeah, that Gang of Four, left and said, that Gang of Four left and said, oh, if you're going to have, getting out of the European Union as part of the platform, people need to vote for us. And and it's kind of strange how it completely flipped.
Well, some of the SDP traitors became key figures in the new Labour regime. Yes, it was certainly an interesting time. But I mean, don't forget that Michael Foot only became the leader because Jim Callaghan resigned ahead of the new rules coming into being that empowered members. There was an electoral college, because up until that time, now we have one member, one vote. But prior to 1981, I think it was, the leader of the party was elected simply by members of parliament. And Tony Benn stood for that, but didn't have the constituency within the parliamentary Labour Party to win. He was by far and away the best candidate, and Michael Foot came through, as it were, and then Tony Benn put himself forward for the deputy leadership. But I think had Callaghan stayed on until such time as the new rules had come into being, then there was every chance that Tony Benn would have become the leader. But look, the SDP was set up, and they formed a coalition or an alliance, should I say, with the Liberal Party. They fought the election in 1983, and essentially they handed Thatcher the right-wing Tory government, an overwhelming landslide majority on a smaller share of the vote than they got in 1979 in 1983. And the same thing happened in 1987. And in the aftermath of 1987 general election, there was then moves by David Steele, who was the leader of the Liberal Party, to create a new party to formalise the alliance, if you like. And so rather than it being the Liberal SDP alliance, they wanted to create a new party. That's how the Liberal Democrats were born. Actually, David Owen didn't want to go along with that and didn't actually join it. He ploughed his own furrow as a lone voice, or one or two hangers-on as the SDP, as it were. So it's interesting that we're now kind of getting back to the position where we were when Blair was the leader, and obviously this was after Labour had got a landslide majority in 1997, and they opened the door to, and there were talks, I believe, that went on. I think it was John Prescott who stymied that, and one or two others who weren't prepared to go along with it. But it almost came to the point where there was a formal merger of the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party back then. So it isn't beyond the realms of possibility at all, in my opinion, for that to happen now. I'm not sure there's necessarily any formal talks going on in that regard, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that. I do think there is a kind of a realignment needed in British politics now. It's very difficult to pull off, because in this first past the post electoral system, it's quite a tricky thing to kind of break through, as it were. But I do feel there is an appetite growing for a new vehicle. I mean, I've been put under a lot of pressure to create a new party. George Galloway's already set up a new political party. If another new party were to emerge, I think one thing that would have to happen, in my view, would be to, work in concert with other progressive parties and trying to kind of build some sort of rainbow coalition. Because if we end up sort of standing against each other, that just, you end up with, you're just helping the political opponents, as it were.
A political party in Britain, which is close to sort of to most of my views. I mean, I disagree with them on some issues. Is the Socialist Equality Party, and I interviewed the national secretary of that party, Chris Marsden, who's a contributor to the World Socialist website. But I mean, if memory serves me well, I think they tend to shy away from that whole compromise and let's the whole art of compromise factor, which I do understand, but
it's not necessarily about compromise. I mean, obviously, politics is the art of the possible, and sometimes you kind of can only go so far in that sense if you want to get some electoral success. Although I think you can be more radical. I think there is an appetite for a more radical proposition than what we are seeing at the minute. I mean, democracy is ill-served by the main political party at the moment because there isn't any real choice in that sense. But it's not so much about a compromise, but a recognition that, I mean, I think you can, in my view anyway, you kind of, and we're not setting up a political party at this stage. We're trying to create a social movement. But ultimately, there may be a new, a demand for a new vehicle, a new political electoral vehicle that might emerge. My view is that needs to come from the bottom up, from the grassroots. But in that eventuality, then I would like to see each political entity could maintain its own identity, but reach an accommodation in relation to which parliamentary seats each particular constituent part of that Rainbow Coalition would fight in that sense.
I'd like to see, like you said, I'd like to see that kind of a thing, a kind of a rainbow, a kind of a rainbow coalition, and a bit of a united front, because I remember watching the Prime Minister's debate when Theresa May was still the Prime Minister and did her thing of not showing up to any debates, and you saw Paul Nutzel of UKIP on the same stage as Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP, Leanne something of Plaid Cymru and Jeremy Corbyn, and and Caroline Lucas of the Greens. And okay, we can criticize their conduct in power, but that's for another day. However, you had this bizarre thing where there were actually four party leaders who actually were all advocating, including the Liberal Democrats to an extent, renationalizing the NHS, putting an end to austerity, putting more funding in education. And you thought to yourself, well, that's the kind of united front I would like to see, as well as giving more powers back to the regions instead of this London centralized thing where even in London people don't have much of a say over how the distribution of wealth.
No, indeed, and I'm not sure I'd want to include the Liberals in any kind of progressive coalition. I particularly see them as a progressive party in that sense. But no, you're right. I think, well, that's for another day. I mean, we're a long way from that at the moment. But ultimately, that's where we may end up. And frankly, I would also like to see, some form of electoral reform. The way we elect politicians in this country is not fit for purpose. I didn't used to be an advocate of electoral reform, but I am now, and I think my view changed.
What's the problem with the with the whole first past the post thing? Past guest Dimitri Lascaris of Canada says that the first past the post system, it's a very unfair system, and he was explaining how it works in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same thing in Britain. But remind people the problems of the first past the post system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the majority view isn't reflected in Parliament. Winner takes all, and you can have a political party with an overwhelming majority. Even Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, for that matter, didn't get a majority of the country to support them, and yet they had an unassailable majority in the House of Commons. And so alternative viewpoints, and I believe there is a progressive majority in this country, but it's never reflected in Parliament, and that's because of the first past the post system. I think if you had a more proportional system of electing representatives, it wouldn't have to be necessarily a list system. You could have a hybrid system where you could still keep the constituency connection, and then maybe elect some people for a list. So there are a range of different options available. But I think that would then help. And I think it also probably lead to a healthy split in the Labour Party, because the Labour Party is an unholy alliance which is fracturing anyway, in spite of the electoral system that forces these two or even more competing tendencies within the Labour Party together. But there'd be a more honest approach, I think, and then after the election, you would have, I think, a House of Commons that would be more reflective of opinion in the country as a whole. And then I think, you'd form an administration, which would be very likely one that would, because I think there is a majority for progressive politics in this country, that would more likely enable us to put into practice the sort of more radical, if you can call it that. It's not particularly radical in the overall scheme of things, but it's radical compared to where we've been as a country, certainly for the last 40 years or so, proposals in relation to, public services and the rest of it. And I think it would also enable you to, engage with people much more. I mean, one of the things that I found when I was going around the country on the Democracy Roadshow inside the Labour Party was that in what are known as safe Tory seats, for example, in the home counties, you'd got very active, thriving political parties there who had been inspired, many of them, to join the party because of the programme that Jeremy Corbyn was articulating. But they recognised that they were never going to be able to get any electoral foothold in the place where they lived. And so they would either not do anything or in their constituency, or very little, because they were demotivated by that, or they would go off and campaign in other constituencies. Now, if you had some sort of,
and that's even if they do have a very large share of the vote. So even if so even if like millions of people voted for an SCP or George Galloway's his old Respect Party, even if they got like a very good percentage of the vote in which they deserve a seat in Parliament, because of this kind of political match fixing that goes on with first past the post, they'll not even get anywhere near Parliament because of it's already a bunch of people. It's already 2 million votes for the Tories, so therefore translates to many Tories in Parliament, right?
Absolutely.
Or Labour.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you had a more proportional system, then every vote would literally matter, and I think that would really motivate people. And I think if you had that combined with some of the other proposals that I was pushing for in relation to the way in which the party makes policy and so on, I think that would be another way of bringing people in and making people feel that their voices are valued and that they could actually make a genuine contribution in that sense, and that it'd be more worthwhile getting involved in politics. But as things currently stand, it's very much in a kind of elitist activity, and virtually all the power is vested in the parliamentary Labour Party. They have far too much power. And as I always used to say, as I was saying earlier on in our conversation, that it's not a career, it's a privilege. And my view was that as MPs, that they are the servants of the movement, the servants of the electorate in that sense, not their masters. But unfortunately, I've been proven wrong, and the way things are currently constituted, they are the masters, sadly.
And is it better then to describe the UK not as a liberal democracy? Although just like you said, compassionate conservative, how I describe liberals often, is an oxymoron. I would say a liberal democracy, that itself is also an oxymoron. So do you think it's better to describe the UK system as, as a Neo-Dickensian system, and a very Kafkaesque, plutocratic, classist system, with an unaccountable national security state, or a deep state which pursues, in a very imperialist, colonial foreign policy abroad? Do you think that's a better way to describe the UK state and the anatomy of the modern UK states?
I think that's probably a fair assessment. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not fit for purpose as it's presently constituted, and the elites have far too much influence, and the government operates really in the interests of elites and corporations, really. And that's why I come back to this point about representative democracy not being fit for purpose. My question is, who are they representing? They're not representing the people that elect them. They're representing the interests of the military-industrial complex, representing the interests of the elites, the faceless corporations. And I guess it's no coincidence that some people have done incredibly well out of the austerity period. I think there's more millionaires now than there's ever been in this country. People have been able to profit from the poverty and misery of millions of others. And the system is broken, and I think there's a reckoning coming at some point. And hopefully the sort of movement that we are trying to build, the spontaneous Black Lives Matter movement that is really sprung into life following the incidents in Minnesota. I mean, I went along to a rally in Derby. Derby's just a smallish provincial city, a population of about 250,000. And there was a Black Lives Matter rally a few weeks ago. And it was interesting because there's been a tradition of a labour movement activity, etc., in Derby. And, various meetings and open air rallies and so on have been organised by the traditional labour movement. But this was something which was organised by people outside of that, and that's very encouraging. And in fact, when I went there, I didn't even know about this rally. My son was there, and he rang me and said, "Are you at the rally? Are you coming to the rally?" And I said, "What rally?" And he said, "Oh, it's this part of the matter." "Oh, right, okay." I said, "Well, where are you?" And I'll come down. And so I cycled down there. Eventually managed to find him, and there were no trade union banners there. There were no. I mean, I'm sure there were some Labour Party activists there, but I never saw any other than my son and one or two other friends that had turned out. But it was the biggest rally that Derby's ever witnessed, which is incredible. And this was repeated up and down the country. I was speaking to some friends who live in Dorset, and they were saying they had over 1,000 people in, I think it was Weymouth. They're not renowned for its kind of radical traditions in that sense. So there is certainly something going on, and I think people are increasingly dissatisfied with the political system in this country. I think the COVID-19 crisis has brought this into sharp focus, and who knows? I mean, maybe this is the moment, the 1945 moment. I mean, Ken Loach did a wonderful film called The Spirit of 1945, where he talked about that transformational government. The election of a landslide Labour government, Winston Churchill being thrown out, as it were, and I think
good
you were saying
that's one I also highly recommend people check out. Very good documentary.
Yeah. I mean, and we may be, we may look back in the future at at this moment in history, the aftermath of the COVID crisis, and the change that brings about. Let's hope that's true. Certainly, it feels that there is something in the ether, and I hope that we can capture that and use that to bring about positive change.
Two last questions then for you is following the UN Special Rapporteur on poverty, and I think it was extreme poverty, and who did a very, very shocking, report on poverty in the UK and extreme poverty in the UK. His name was Philip Alston, and he talked about he slammed successive austerity policies and that British governments have pursued, and in light of following the the banking and the housing crisis, he really slammed the Tory Liberal coalition and the successive governments following that, and their abuse of disabled people trapped in welfare and penalized for it, literally penalized and punished for it. And anyone who has seen, you mentioned Ken Loach, anyone who has seen his film, I, Daniel Blake, and think that that's just, left-wing propaganda, not true. Steve Topple of The Canary has written about the abuse of disabled people under these very Neo-Dickensian, policies. And there was a book called Crippled, which showed how awful the austerity policies have been on everyone and anyone, but especially disabled people. And I want to get your reaction to that. And is that further proof that, that the UK is not a democracy, but it is very much a classist classist system, and very much Neo-Dickensian, and again, Kafkaesque.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. I mean, I think the evidence is all around us when you look at the austerity, impact of austerity. Estimates suggest is well over 100,000. I think it's 150,000 people, or maybe more actually, maybe over 200. Anyway, it's a substantial number of people have lost their lives that can be attributed to the austerity measures that were imposed completely unnecessarily by the governments of David Cameron and Nick Clegg. And that's had a devastating effect on disabled people, on working class people in the country. And what is troubling is that the Labour Party under Miliband and under Starmer now is not really offering an alternative, offering more of the same. In fact, under Miliband, Rachel Reeves, I think who was the Shadow Secretary of State for Social Security at the time, suggested that Labour would be even harder on welfare, so-called welfare, than the Tories were. This is appalling.
But also be harder on immigration. Let's not forget that. Those ridiculous mugs of Labour's going to be, tough on immigration.
Yes, no, I agree, and we have got to do better than that, and that's why I think so many people have kind of given up really on the Labour Party, and why Jeremy was such a breath of fresh air. It was obvious. It was, hundreds of thousands of people don't kind of suddenly take an interest in and join a political party for no reason, and that hope and expectation sadly has been dashed. It's just a question of how we can harness it now, I think, going forward. But there's no doubt about it that this is a class-based society, and under Blair in particular, that notion of class politics, it started really under Kinnock, though, I've got to say. They had abandoned Labour Party.
A liberal posing as a social democrat or as a socialist.
They substituted, any kind of notion of class politics for identity politics, and that's led us to a situation where Boris Johnson can claim to have the most diverse cabinet in the history of the British government, when we all know that the people sitting in his cabinet, there may be more women and black and brown faces, but they don't represent the working class of the country. They don't represent working class black and brown people. They don't represent working class women in society, and you need that kind of, if you like, intersectionality sort of understanding, I suppose. Which Jeremy
briefly had, but due to the endless soap opera and soap box that was Brexit, and due to the fake anti-Semitism crisis, and due to the fake anti-Semitism crisis, they stopped focusing on trying to actually reach out to people of color.
No, indeed. I mean, I think on both those things, really. One, well, we've already mentioned the anti-Semitism crisis. I think Jeremy should have stood up for his own reputation, the party's reputation, and called out these fake smears, that they were putting about, and he should have really challenged them and defended, his Praetorian Guard, people who basically would die in a ditch for him. And unfortunately, Jeremy, for whatever reason, decided that wasn't the right thing to do politically, and but anyway, he got consumed by it. And similarly, on the whole Brexit question, the position that the party took in its 2017 manifesto was to respect the referendum, and implement the wishes of the British people in that referendum, whichever way you think about it. I mean, there was a referendum and people voted the way they did. I campaigned for Remain and Reform, although now subsequently said that we have to accept the outcome, and the issue isn't whether we're in or out the European Union. The issue is what kind of vision do we have for the country, and
why then? But that being said, why then did how come you weren't then given a seat in Derby North, and how come Dennis Skinner, old school socialist Labour, Benites, how come the pair of you weren't given seats when you guys both said? I mean, he of course was a Lexiteer. You were just like, well, listen, this is the party's official position, which I respected. This is the will of the British people, which I will respect. So why don't we offer our own vision of a post-Brexit society? How come then the electorate didn't give you guys a seat, but instead gave it to these reactionary Tories who are only going to give them endless austerity?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Dennis was standing for the Labour Party, so people voted accordingly, irrespective of Dennis's position on that. And of course, his constituency has substantially changed from the day of what it was when he was first elected in 1970, when it was very much a mining community. It's changed in nature demographically and so on. But I think certainly the fact that he was standing as a may have had a Lexiteer position in relation to the European Union, but at the end of the day, he was standing for the Labour Party, and the Labour Party was talking about a second referendum, and many leading figures in the party were saying not only would they campaign for Remain, but they were suggesting that Labour was a Remain party. My position on it was very clear that, and it was clear, I know politicians often say, let me be clear about this. I was saying, look, we absolutely have to accept the outcome of the referendum. And the issue isn't anyway whether we're in or out the European Union. The issue is, what vision do we have for Britain outside the European Union? And we are a wealthy economy, a big economy. We have our own sovereign currency, and we are a currency issuing government. So therefore, we can invest in a big fiscal stimulus. We have that ability to do that. And we could have said, and indeed should have said, and actually called out the lies about leaving the European Union, where they were saying this will lead to even worse austerity and recession and all the rest of it. All of the economic forecasters were saying that irrespective of whether you're inside or outside the European Union, the economy will grow. What they were forecasting was that if we left the European Union with a deal, the economy would continue to grow, but grow a bit less quickly than what it would if we'd stayed inside the European Union, according to their forecast. And they also said if we left without a deal, the economy would still continue to grow, but again, a bit more slowly than if we left with a deal, or if we stayed inside the European Union. But my point was, look, this whole way in which we measure economic growth and economic success is not a particularly useful instrument to determine how successful your economy is being, because with the fifth biggest economy in the world right now, we've got 14 million people living in poverty, and all the reasons I mentioned earlier, thousands sleeping on the street, millions in precarious employment. But my argument was, look, we have our own sovereign currency. We're a currency issuer. There's plenty of idle capacity in the country. We've got many people who are unemployed, many people who are underemployed. There's a massive need for infrastructure improvements. We're seeing jobs which have been offshore to low-wage economies. We can use the power that's available to the government to invest in a big fiscal stimulus, to improve our public services, to improve our infrastructure, to put all the people who want employment back into work, as it were, to invest in our public services and our social security system. We have the ability to do that, and that we can make sure that with the flexibilities that are now open to Britain, not just as a currency issuing government with its big economy and all the rest of it, that gives us the flexibility to do those things, but you're also unencumbered by the state aid rules, for example, that are imposed upon the country through membership of the European Union. And we can therefore intervene in the economy in ways which are more difficult inside the European Union. We can intervene and stop jobs being offshored to low-wage economies, and we can set the standard, as it were, rather than, if you like, slavishly following, which were some reasonable standards being inside the European Union. But we could be setting the standard beyond the those which are contained inside the European Union.
In fact, Grace Blakely, economics writer, yes, for the New Statesman. Yeah. She was a former Green who became a Corbynista later. Yes. Yeah. She I don't agree with everything she says, but she was saying that a Green New Deal was much more possible outside of the European Union. Whether one agrees with her or not is besides the point. But she was saying it's not all doom and gloom leaving the European Union, and who knows, maybe if Corbyn had just said to people, look, I know you're scared of leaving the EU, but here are, but it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. But it's not
doom and gloom at all. Look, it's doom and gloom already. I mean, people used to say that to me, but I said, "What are you talking about, doom and gloom? It's doom and gloom now, isn't it? You know, we've got, as I've already said, 14 million people in poverty, 1.5 million destitute, thousands sleeping on the street, millions in precarious employment, public services kind of in meltdown, social security,
And this is even when Britain was in the.
I already remember. Look, the point. Look, our argument should have been. I say our. I'm not a member of the Labour Party anymore. But the Labour Party's argument, and what I was arguing for when I was still in the Parliamentary Labour Party, we used to get shouted down at Parliamentary Labour Party meetings for saying these kind of things. But what we should have been saying in the election, what the Labour Party should have been saying in the election, is rather than leaving it to Boris Johnson to say, "Get Brexit done," Labour should have been saying, "We will get Brexit done. But we will deliver a people's Brexit, not a banker's Brexit." What Boris Johnson's Tories will do will deliver a Brexit in the interests of the ruling elites, of the corporations, the faceless corporations, against the interests of ordinary working people. By contrast, we will deliver a Brexit which will work in your interests, which will protect your jobs, which will improve your living standards, which will create jobs for people, which will build houses for people, which will improve the infrastructure, bring back the jobs which have been offshored to low-wage economies. And we will become world leaders. That's what we will do outside the European Union. I think they could have won the election on that basis. But frankly, many of the people inside the Labour Party, many of the people inside virtually all of the people inside the bureaucracy of the Labour Party didn't want Labour to win. They were sabotaging. They wanted to completely and comprehensively smash the Corbyn project, smash any hope of a modest socialist programme, smash any hope of a ethical foreign policy that would have prioritised support for the Palestinian people over the apartheid right-wing Likud regime in Israel. These are things they couldn't countenance, and that's why they worked together in concert to ensure that they destroyed the Corbyn project. And frankly, I just wish that Jeremy and the campaign group of Labour MPs had listened to myself and others who were making, it wasn't just me, to make those arguments. I think we'd have been in a far better position. But look, I know some people were saying, well, if we'd have come out in favour of Brexit, the sort of line that I was saying, we would lose votes in some of our Remain seats. But many of that, well, that's possibly true. But I think if you'd set out the kind of prospectus that I was saying, I think you could have won many of those people over. But if you'd lost a few thousand votes in Diane Abbott's seat, for example, in Jeremy's seat, and some of these other ones in London, they're sitting on majorities of 30 and 40,000, for God's sake. And so it was like a death warrant that they were signing, agreeing to a second referendum, agreeing to an election in the middle of winter. It was almost the winter solstice, for crying out loud. Ridiculous. And then coupled with the demoralisation of the membership by this whole phony anti-Semitism crisis and the routine and industrial scale suspensions that were going on. So some of the most active, long-standing members were being thrown under the bus. And I know that many of those activists, in spite of what had been done to them, they still went and tried to help in the campaign, but they were being turned away, saying, "We don't want your help. Go away." And it was just like signing a suicide note.
Yeah, and it was electoral suicide. And alrighty, then final question, because holy shit, becoming the Joe Rogan experience. We're almost at 2 hours, and I gotta let you go. But all right, then final question, and I'm hoping you can convert me into optimism, because I'm feeling very pessimistic about the future of Britain, the future of Canada, everywhere. I'm just feeling so pessimistic and so bleak about the future. And I'm just wondering, with all that being said, it's it seems as if the system in the UK and the way the propaganda machine works, that even when you have a Jeremy Corbyn in power of a major party, the electorate, for whatever reason, still still rejects it. Still rejects it, And should the UK just become a one-party state where we're all conservatives, where the Labour Party renames itself into a one nation, calls themselves one nation Tories, the Liberal Democrats call themselves compassionate conservatives, and the Green Party renames itself into the eco-capitalist party, because it seems no matter what the Tories do, and no matter what the Tories do, whether it's the phone hacking scandal, whether it's completely mucking up Brexit, whether it's the Grenfell Tower scandal, whether it's the Windrush generation scandal, it seems that people, I just don't understand how the electorate still votes for the Conservative Party, and that's even with someone as buffoonish as Boris Johnson, and there's so many other things I could say about Johnson, but I won't say that. And with that being said, shouldn't we all just become the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a kind of counsel of despair, and I think back to some of the great icons of liberation struggles and the early labour movement in this country, and the travails and difficulties that they had to overcome and did overcome. And, the power of solidarity is an incredibly powerful thing. And I just believe that those of us, progressives, people on the left, we have a duty really to keep hope alive. And I'm always reminded of a wonderful quotation from the film The Shawshank Redemption, where Red Redding is talking to Andy Dufresne. They're in the mess hall, and Andy Dufresne had just come out of solitary confinement because he'd had the temerity to play this beautiful opera music over the tannoy, because he'd become a trusted prisoner. He was doing, if you've seen the film, the accounts for the prison governor and the prison guards. And they for his troubles, he was beaten and thrown in solitary confinement. And Red Redding and some of the other inmates were saying to him, "What on earth were you doing that for? You're crazy." And he said a word to the effect, "It's about hope. I have to give people hope." And Red Redding narrowed his eyes, if you remember the exchange in the film, and looked at him and Andy Dufresne straight in the face and said, "Andy, hope is a very dangerous thing in this place." And Andy Dufresne responded by saying, "No, Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." So I think as socialists, as progressives, we have a duty to keep hope alive, to continue to fight for justice, to fight for the underdog. And remember another wonderful quotation from Tony Benn. He said, "There are two flames that burn in the human heart: the flame of anger against injustice, and the flame of hope that we can build a better world." And by standing together in solidarity, I believe that we can build that better world. We have to. Nelson Mandela inspired us all and achieved it in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa. Gandhi achieved it with the movement that he inspired and secured independence for India. And many other leaders over the years have, in spite of incredible adversity, have continued to keep hope alive and continue to inspire. And, we can inspire each other and support each other. And by doing that, that's where we have power. We only have power as ordinary working people. We have power when we stand in solidarity together. If we stand on our own, then we're nothing. But when we stand together, we're unstoppable. And that's what we have to try and inspire people to do, to recognize the strength of our collective endeavor.
And on that note, I'll just close by saying, twice past guest on this show, the brilliant Margaret Kimberley of Black Agenda Report, who's the author of a fantastic history book called Prejudicial, U.S. Presidents and Black America. No, I got the subtitle wrong, but yeah, it's called Prejudicial, and it's about Black America's experiences with all the U.S. presidents. And she and I think, and I remember her saying to me, and her saying in another interview with on Primo Nutmeg, that people that the people power movements need to learn to be adversarial with their politicians, as opposed to thinking that hope is going to come from the above if we just vote for them. In response to into a lot of the anger that Tulsi Gabbard supporters felt when she endorsed Joe Biden, and a lot of the mass anger for people who felt that Bernie Sanders was, a wimp and a chump, second time around. And she was saying that we need to be more adversarial towards towards the system. Whitney Webb, who's been on the show, and I hope that she comes back on the show. I would love to have her back on the show. But I remember listening to interviews of her, including when she did this very long phone conversation with Maria Farmer, one of the victims of Epstein and the ghoulish network of the UK, Israeli, US. Deep state and organized crime networks, in that in that awful thing that that he was running, still is running. And she was saying to Maria Farmer, if people just stopped being afraid of these people, they would probably be vanquished. That people that it's the fear that people have, whether it's also the fear that people have on the whole smear campaign that Israel does, that keeps the injustice still alive. Yeah. And I think we were even talking off camera, and I was saying to you that that more than once I was even thinking of even pulling the plug on this show, because not getting the views it's getting. And a lot of my friends were saying, dude, you're being ridiculous if you adopt that. And you were saying to me that it's well, yeah, say that thing about the whole acorns.
Small acorns, yeah. Giant oak trees grow, and we're planting acorns. We have to keep planting acorns and encourage others to plant acorns. And we do that, we'll create an oak forest of resistance, and ultimately we will prevail.
But there is no hope in the Labour Party, and we do need a new party.
That's probably true.
And stronger people power movement in that respect.
Yeah.
Well, on that optimistic note, Chris Williamson, former MP for Derby North, now a brilliant journalist and the host of the Festival of Resistance, who's going to keep in touch with me so I can tell the audience when the Festival of Resistance will happen in person. But that's going to be hopefully sometime if the COVID-19 situation goes down. Anywho, Chris, thank you so much for coming back on the show, and we're definitely going to have you back on again. All right.
Nice one. Thanks a lot. Good to speak to you. All the best. Cheers.
Likewise.
Thank you.